Welcome to The Stream. I'm Femi Oke. A Ugandan mother has launched a landmark legal effort to be reunited with her child who was taken through a fraudulent adoption. But her case isn't unique. Today we ask, has international adoption tricked Ugandan parents from their children? Send your thoughts through Twitter and YouTube. In most cases, adoption gives a child opportunity and stability. But some biological parents in Uganda have lost their children without their consent amid fraud and exploitation. Last week, a mother filed a Ugandan court petition to overturn what she says is the illegal adoption of her son. Alaso Olivia Patience from campaign group No White Saviours suggested that the stream cover this story and sent this video comment. Have a look.
Very important is because the adoptions are still happening, the fraud adoptions, papers of children leaving for the United States or any part of the world are still being signed up to now. So there should be a stop on this by the Ugandan government. This is what we're encouraging for now. Adoptions should be put aside as Uganda finds solutions to this problem.
We're joined from the Ugandan capital, Kampala, by Dennis Inap of Magnet Advocates. He is the legal representative for the mother who filed that petition. Anna Cavell is a correspondent whose Emmy Award-winning Faultlines film, Adoption Inc., The Baby Business, examined fraudulent adoption cases in Uganda. She's also in Kampala. Nicholas Apayo is a human rights lawyer who has in the past worked on adoption cases. He's also in the Ugandan capital. And joining us right here in our Washington, D.C. studio, Ryan Hanlon. He is Vice President at the National Council for Adoption. Hello, everybody. It's good to have you here. Nicholas, you used to work on adoption cases. It was such an awful experience, you gave up. Why?
Well, about 12 years ago, when I was still a much younger attorney, I had a couple of clients who had retained me to provide legal representation and advice for an evangelical baby's home in the eastern part of Uganda. And in that process, I did handle a couple of adoption cases. But after just 1 year of doing a couple of cases, I gave up the practice because the entire system of adoption process in this country was fraught with corruption, was fraught with irregularities, and my conscience wasn't clear. On so many occasions, so many American families came for court hearings and only met their child for the first time in court. And so that process gave me a cause for pause, and my conscience wasn't clear. I abandoned the process. I reported this case to the American Embassy and to the Ministry of Justice to say something is not right here. Unfortunately, at the time, the leading law firm that was doing adoption cases was a law firm run by the Attorney General of the Republic of Uganda. And so nothing much was done about it. And the situation was allowed to continue.
You know, Dennis, what you're describing is actually not atypical in that with international adoption, it's a very normal thing that when U.S. families travel, they often don't meet that child until they're in country to finalize the adoptive placement. So exactly what you're describing there is something that we would see in countries all over the world. The system is designed that way, where the parents aren't in the country or selecting a child in advance. They're receiving paperwork from the foreign government or from the foreign entities that they're partnering with. The U.S. side and the foreign country side are partnering in that collaboration.
So Ryan, that sounds quite like a transaction. It sounds like you don't have to turn up until the product is ready. It's very transactional.
Well, and we wouldn't want to use those commercial terms when we're talking about anything pertaining to, children in that regard. But what we want to talk about are the safeguards that are put in place. And we need safeguards where on the U.S. side, we're screening and assessing parents. And then on the foreign side, they're screening the entire situation involving the birth parents, preparing a file on the child to make sure we have the proper medical information, the sociobiographical history, and then the foreign government and the U.S. government are both agreeing to that adoption process.
The idea is the paperwork gets done first before families meet children.
Yes.
That's deliberate.
That's ideal.
All right, let me Nicholas, let me show something. Yeah, go ahead, Nicholas, and then I want to show our audience something, because I feel like to connect with this, you want to see the families. And Anna went and met families on both sides of the Atlantic. Nicholas, you go ahead briefly. Go ahead.
I think in cases involving children, what is most important is for the families to be able to have a connection with the child. It is not simply about the paperwork. You must have an emotional connection, because if the child rejects you, it will be a very difficult emotional process for the child going forward. So I think that first interaction with the child is extremely important. And the fact that this is not being done, and it's even being suggested that it's not necessary, I think for me is in complete disregard of the emotional well-being of the child.
Dennis, am I right in thinking that the laws in Uganda have changed somewhat over the last few years, so that there is a period of time where the adoptive parents have to be available to that child and have to have contact with that child for, is it a year or is it 3 years? Help me out here.
Thank you. I think what my brother Ryan is saying is far missing the point. And I want to concur with my brother Nicholas that the relationship between an adoptive parent and a child is that of parental responsibility. And a child, together with a potential or intending adoptive parent, should have an opportunity to live together so that the bond grows. Now, in the Ugandan laws, under the Children's Act, an intending adoptive parent is supposed to live with a child for a period of 1 year, and they should have fostered that child for that one period. Unfortunately, the system is skewed in a way that applicants exploit the loopholes as to defeat the ends of justice in as far as children's interests are concerned in adoptive processes.
All right, guests, let me just take a pause for a moment. I want to play a little bit of the Faultlines film that Anna was involved in making, because it takes us out of the process and the paperwork and really introduces the real people behind some of the stories where they have gone wrong. Have a look.
The only place Florence and Jennifer see their children now is in photos. 5 years ago, they sent them to stay with their sister Mariam. But when they returned to collect them, their children had disappeared. Mariam claimed she'd put them in a boarding school, but in fact the children had been taken to America, legally adopted without their mother's knowledge.
What do you think about the fact that a family can come from another country and become the legal parents of somebody else's children?
And I want to bring you into this conversation, but via some tweets and some comments from our online community. So look at Eva here. Eva says, it would appear that the adoptive parents and or the orphanages are taking advantage of the language communication barriers of the mothers. Instead of helping the mothers raise their children, the system is enabling the children to be taken away. Very sad. And then this, very simply, from Nakwazi, they steal children. What is your take?
Well, I think we were talking about the other guests were talking about the paperwork earlier, and that is significant. But I think what it might be difficult for people outside Uganda and other countries like Uganda, what might be difficult to understand is that institutions don't function as efficiently as they do elsewhere in the world, in the US, for example. And people's communities and people's families are not necessarily going to be as organized as people in the developed world would expect. So it might seem very surprising that two mothers could send their children off to boarding school and have no idea that they've been legally adopted without their knowledge. That's because documents here can very easily be forged. And in that case, for example, the aunt posed as the mother of those children and was able to take those documents not only to court, but also to the US Embassy and claim that she was the mother of those children. So the paperwork was significant only in that it was all appearing to be official as far as anybody in court or at the American Embassy or the US Adoption Agency may have been concerned. And I think that is at the heart of what this problem is, because if you can't trust the paperwork, or if you can't trust the institutions, or if corruption is widespread, it's very, very difficult to protect the families in Uganda who are losing their children. And it's also difficult to protect the adoptive families in places like America, because when they discover what's happened, when they discover this fraud, they're also victims of this. It's very difficult.
Anna, you're right that we do need those protections in place. And what I would say is that we have protections in place and there are solutions here. We can do DNA testing of these individuals to determine, are they the birth parent or are they a different relative or are they not related to a child at all, so that we don't have that exact same situation happen. We can do recorded interviews to make sure this isn't happening. But right now the system in Uganda is the same as it is in many countries, where the birth parents or others would have to go to court and provide an irrevocable consent. They're then interviewed again by the U.S. consulate. And so, you know, there are solutions, and we need more safeguards such as the ones I'm proposing here to put those protections in place, because to your point, we don't want any parents, the birth parents or the adoptive parents, to feel like anything was not all but above board.
Anna, go ahead.
I do appreciate that is an effort that some countries are making. But what I think, again, it's difficult for outsiders to understand is that's not necessarily going to help. All of the families who were tricked into giving up their children, who I met, didn't understand what was happening. So in many cases, they were coached to go to court or to the US Embassy and lie, because they understood that they were getting a wonderful sponsorship opportunity, for example. So these people were very, very easily exploited by the agents who were finding these babies. And a DNA test wouldn't change that, because these people were coached to go and lie in court and at the American Embassy. And again, that might seem difficult to understand from the perspective of an American audience. But here in Uganda, if a woman is a single mother, she's illiterate, she has no money, and somebody apparently of influence, like a lawyer or an adoption agent, comes to her and tells her what to do, it'd be very difficult for her to resist. She's very, very easily tricked. It's very easy to mislead these people. And I mean, something that people here are fond of saying is there is no understanding of adoption in Uganda. Apparently there is no equivalent term. So it's very difficult to explain to somebody in a rural area.
Well, I think I have more faith than you do in the people of Uganda to understand what adoption is. And it is a cultural practice. It's something that happens within families within Uganda all the time. So I don't think what you're saying is accurate at all. And I think what you're describing here, I mean, even the film that you had, we had a birth parent whose child had already been placed for international adoption. So the idea that she doesn't understand that just doesn't make sense.
Yes, Nicholas?
Graham, the social setup of communities in Uganda is that by their very own nature, societies are communal. Children are viewed as children of the community. Families are extended families. And so the concept of adopting a child by another clan or another family is indeed foreign, because no child is deemed to be homeless. No child is deemed to be without parents, because a child is born into a society, is born into a community. So the whole concept of adoption is part of the foreign justice system that we've adopted here. But socially speaking, across the country, that perception was not widespread. Children belong to the clan, children belong to extended families. Even in cases where their birth parents have died, no child is given away. The child is believed to be a child of the clan, and everybody had a responsibility for raising that child.
So I think that's a good point, but Femi, we're missing an important part of the conversation here, and Anna's film completely missed, or perhaps purposefully excluded, an important voice here, which is that there's an organization going around Uganda trying to coerce and threaten birth parents and telling them they need to rescind. And then that same organization is reaching out to U.S. families and doing the same thing. So I have a question. Anna, why didn't you report on that in your film?
I've actually never heard of that. Is that something recent? I don't know who those people are.
It's not recent, no. I would have thought, had you researched this,
what's the name of the organization?
It's called Reunite.
Let me play this in, Ryan, because it's a little clip from the film, and I think what Anna did in the film was she did reflect that money was a big impact in terms of people feeling that maybe my child will be looked after better by these other people across the ocean, not quite understanding maybe what that transaction actually meant. And the local agent who used to work for one of those organizations said that she was pushed into working for them, and if she didn't do the work, she would be fired. Have a look at this clip.
So what was the involvement of Journeys of the Heart?
They were to provide the financial support, and then I would provide the service.
And what was the service?
The service was to find children that can be adopted. They wanted everything fast. Because if you get a child today, spends in a home like 2 months, 3 months, is adopted, that means they are spending less on this child. But if a child comes, stays for a year, it's much expense.
And they would say that to you? They would say,
we need children that can be adopted fast.
So Dennis, this idea of this mother who doesn't have the parental rights over her own child and you are trying to get them back for her, is that even possible? Legally, she's not the parent anymore.
My sister Anne Cavell summarizes the entire situation as it is under the Ugandan system, where adoptive parents abuse the processes and procure information together with the court grants. Now, the case we are handling is close to what Anna is saying. Mm-hmm. We have 2 legal guardians living in Louisiana who misrepresented to court that the parents of the child who was eventually taken, but for whom a guardianship order was granted, was deceased. Yeah. But when you look at the records, the mother is with us.
So Dennis, just briefly, because I know you've been following this case for a long time, I just wanted to know, can you get your child back if there has been some paperwork that's gone awry, there's been some fraud involved? Can this mother become the mother again? Or will the adoptive parents who are legally the guardians, will they at some point be able to get their child from Uganda, their child?
Where legal guardians procure an adoption order, it then becomes a ground for challenging or for applying for revocation of that very grant. Where an applicant misrepresents...
Let Dennis finish, just briefly. Let Dennis finish. Basically, is she going to get her child back, Dennis? That's all I was curious about knowing. Is that possible?
It is our responsibility to move court in the direction of that mother being reunited with a child.
All right. Let me bring in.
But there is every ground.
Let me bring in another thought. I just want to run this by Ryan, right? Because the concept of international, inter-country adoptions is quite controversial and has become more so, and they're actually beginning to drop. And the more countries that say no, you cannot take our children out of the country, the more places like Uganda and the Democratic Republic of Congo become more attractive for families and parents to possibly be able to adopt. Do you feel that adoption should not be allowed to happen from one country to another country? Would that make life a lot simpler for both sets of families?
Of course not. There's hundreds of thousands, millions of children around the world growing up without parents.
Right.
And if we cherry pick one case here and one case there, and we make a documentary and say, you know, adoption's bad.
I won't let you use air quotes for a Faultlines documentary. It is a documentary, no air quotes allowed.
It didn't come across as journalism. It came across as activism. It didn't show the whole story. What I was saying earlier before I was cut off is there are organizations going around from birth parents threatening them, telling them they have to rescind, you know, telling them that what they did was wrong. And so none of that was reported on in that so-called documentary. I don't think that's an accurate depiction of adoption whatsoever. In fact, I think adoption is a way that we're able to allow hundreds of thousands of children who need parents to get the loving families that they deserve.
All right, before I go to Anne, I want to show you something here. These are hold tight, everybody. Nicholas, hold tight. This is really important for our audience. Have a look here on my laptop. These are adoptions, international adoptions. I'm going to just pick 2018. I'm going to go down to Uganda, just right down here. Just bear with me, everybody, because I want you to see the number of adoptions that we are talking about that are registered. And then, Anna, you can come right back in here. Here is Uganda. I'm going to press go here, and then you're going to see how many adoptions happened in the last year. 26. Anna, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I'm curious about Ryan's perspective, because he's now talking to 2 Ugandans who are experts in the law. There's a huge volume of evidence which says that fraud does exist in international adoption, coming from places like UNICEF, the American State Department. Ryan, what is your perspective? Why are you so keen to dismiss the idea that there could be cultural differences? Why aren't you prepared to listen to people here in Uganda?
No, I think you're misrepresenting what I'm saying. Of course I'm willing to listen to them. I'm not going to pretend that the other two guests here aren't unbiased. One of them has litigation on this very matter. But you brought up UNICEF. UNICEF around the world has been shown that they aren't supportive of adoption, and they've actually employed Mark Riley, who is part of the couple, who's part of this organization, Reunite, that's anti-adoption, that's going to birth parents and harassing them and threatening them and coercing them. So I'm glad you raised that with UNICEF. And my question again to you is, why are you not reporting on that? How could you put together a documentary where this is widespread reported within Uganda and not show another side of the story? Only one side of the story has been shown in the film you produced.
Let me move on here. You've made your point, and Anna, Anna, just clarify in a line, if you may, and then I want to move on. Go ahead.
Over the course of my 5-year investigation, I interviewed hundreds of people, and the only coercion I found was coming from the adoption agencies, and that was reflected in the film.
All right, let me move on. Ryan, if I may, you both made your point. Ryan, you don't like the film. Anna said she spent a lot of time working on that film. I'm going to move on, if I may. Rakshana Namuyimba is our ambassador for Uganda's Adopt. That's an organisation in Uganda that says that we can take care of our kids, we can take care of them, and we can look after them and adopt them within the country. Have a listen to what she had to contribute to our show today.
I think it's really sad that unscrupulous people are taking advantage of desperate families, and they're being facilitated by different players within the system. I believe adoption should only happen as a last recourse after all efforts have been made to try and resettle children with their birth families, just so they're not kept in institutions, because they honestly don't belong in institutions. And even then, I don't believe that inter-country adoptions are the answer to Uganda's, children's problems, because it's bad enough having to be raised by a family that's not your birth family, but to be taken away from an environment and a culture that you're familiar with into a different country can be very, very difficult. And honestly, we've been adopting our own children formally and informally for a very, very long time, and we do not need to turn to the West.
All right, so I'm just looking here on YouTube. Do not come to my laptop because it's not looking pretty. BBR Rodriguez, create family villages. Do not let foreigners adopt. Nicholas, a couple of other ideas. Change is possible. Perhaps an adoption of international treaties is a first step, enforced through bodies such as the UN, African Union, etc., etc., etc. Are there other ways that children in Uganda can be adopted? Nicholas, go ahead.
I think that first and foremost, it's important to make the point that as a Ugandan, I couldn't go to the U.S. and do what Americans are doing here to our children.
That's not true.
The whole system is unfair. The whole system is geared towards getting children from poor countries, from poor communities. And I think that we must have a discussion about that.
There is Nicholas. There is a conversation in the US. If I just may add, in the US, the reason why parents often adopt overseas is it's very difficult for them to adopt within the United States.
That's actually not true. There's 124,000 children in the U.S. waiting on adoption. They can be adopted from foster care. There's also lots of private domestic adoption. The children that are adopted internationally.
Are they going for young babies? Is that why?
No, actually, Americans more so than any other country adopt older children, children with medical special needs, and children that are part of sibling groups. They're going because there's a need there. I mean, your guests are the clip you just showed. She said she'd prefer children to live in an orphanage instead of a family. That's a ludicrous position. Children have a human right to grow up with parents. They have a human right to a family, and to have guests on there that say otherwise is really appalling, and I think ought to be called out. Nicholas, what you said is absolutely not true.
If I may, I did actually speak just before I came on this evening. I did speak to somebody who works in this field in Uganda.
So, guess, Anna, Nicholas, we are at the end of the show. I can tell that this is a debate that continues. It's a debate that you know very well, Ryan, because the idea of inter-country adoptions is incredibly controversial even to this day. Dennis, Anna, Nicholas, thank you for being part of this conversation. It will continue. We appreciate your time here on the stream. I'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.